Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Welcome back, wildlings, and thank you for joining us for the finale, Part 5, of In the Hills, the Cities, by Clive Barker. They would sleep until morning and then begin the long trek back. By dawn, the bodies in the field would be being quantified, identified, parceled up, and dispatched back to their families. The air would be full of reassuring noises, canceling out the moans that still rang in their ears. There would be helicopters, lorry loads of men organizing the cleaning up operations, all the rites and the paraphernalia of a civilized disaster. And in a while, it would again be palatable. It would become part of their history. A tragedy, of course, but they would explain, classify. They would learn to live with. All would be well, yes, all would be well. Come morning. The sleep of sheer fatigue came on them suddenly. They lay where they'd fallen, still sitting at the table, their heads on their crossed arms. A litter of empty bowls and bread crusts surrounded them. Then they knew nothing, dreamed nothing, felt nothing. But then, the thunder began. In the earth, in the deep earth, a rhythmical tread as of a titan that came by degrees closer and closer. The woman woke her husband. She blew out the lamp and went to the door. The night sky was luminous with stars, the hills black on every side. But the thunder still sounded. A full half-minute between every boom, yes, but louder now, and louder with every new step. They stood at the door together, husband and wife, and listened to the night hills echo back and forth with the sound. There was no lightning to accompany this thunder. Just the boom, boom, boom. It made the ground shake. It threw dust down from the door lintel, and it rattled the window latches. Boom, boom. They didn't know what approached, but whatever shape it took, whatever it intended, there seemed no sense in running from it. Where they stood in the pitiful shelter of their cottage was as safe as any nook in the forest. How could they choose out of 100,000 trees which would be standing when the thunder had passed? Better to wait and watch. The wife's eyes were not good, and she doubted what she saw when the blackness of the hill changed shape and reared up to knock out the stars. But her husband had seen it too. The unimaginably huge head, vaster in the deceiving darkness, looming up and up, dwarfing the hills themselves with its ambition. He fell to his knees, babbling a prayer, his arthritic legs twisted beneath him. His wife screamed. No words she knew could keep this monster at bay. No prayer, no plea had power over it. In the cottage, Mick woke, and his outstretched arm, twitching with a sudden cramp, wiped the plate and the lamp off the table. They smashed. Judd woke. The screaming outside had stopped. The woman had disappeared from the doorway into the forest. Any tree at all, was better than this sight. Her husband still let a string of prayers dribble from his slack mouth as the great leg of the giant rose up to take another step. Boom! The cottage shook. Plates danced and smashed off the dresser. A clay pipe rolled from the mantelpiece and shattered in the ashes of the hearth. The lovers knew the noise that sounded in their substance, that of the earth thunder. Mick reached for Judd and took him by the shoulder. "You see?" he said, his teeth blue-gray in the darkness of the cottage. "See?" There was a kind of hysteria bubbling behind his words. He ran to the door, stumbling over a chair in the dark. Cursing and bruised, he staggered out into the night. Boom! The thunder was deafening. This time, it broke all the windows in the cottage. The bedroom one of the roof joists cracked and flung debris downstairs. Judd joined his lover at the door. The old man was now face down on the ground, his sick and swollen fingers curled, his begging lips pressed to the damp soil. Mick was looking up toward the sky. Judd followed his gaze. There was a place that showed no stars at all. It was a darkness in the shape of a man, a vast, broad human frame, a colossus that soared up to meet heaven. It was not quite a perfect giant. Its outline was not tidy. It seethed and swarmed. He seemed broader, too, this giant, than any real man. His legs were abnormally thick and stumpy, and his arms were not long. The hands, as they clenched and unclenched, seemed oddly jointed and over-delicate for the torso. Then it raised one huge flat foot and placed it back on the earth, taking a stride toward them. Boom! The step brought the roof collapsing in on the cottage. Everything that the car thief had said was true. Popolok was a city and a giant, and it had gone into the hills. Now their eyes were becoming accustomed to the night light. They could see in ever more horrible detail the way this monster was constructed. It was a masterpiece of human engineering. A man made entirely of men, or rather a sexless giant made of men and women and children. All of the citizens of Popolak writhed and strained in the body of this flesh-knitted giant, their muscles stretched to the breaking point, their bones close to snapping. They could see how the architects of Popolak had subtly altered the proportions of the human body, how the thing had been made squatter to lower its center of gravity, how its legs had been made elephantine to bear the weight of the torso, how the head was sunk low onto the wide shoulders so that the problems of a weak neck had been minimized. Despite these malformations, it was still horribly lifelike. The bodies that were bound together to make its surface were naked but for their harnesses, so that its surface glistened in the starlight like one vast human torso. Even the muscles were well copied, though simplified. They could see the way the roped bodies pushed and pulled against each other in solid cords of flesh and bone. They could see the intertwined people that made up the body, the backs, like turtles packed together to offer the sweep of the pectorals, the lashed and knotted acrobats at the joints of the arms, and the legs alike rolling and unwinding to articulate the city. But surely the most amazing sight of all was the face. Cheeks of bodies, cavernous eye sockets in which heads stared, 5 bound together for each eyeball, a broad, flat nose, and a mouth that opened and closed as the muscles of the jaw bunched and hollowed rhythmically. And from that mouth, lined with teeth of bald children, the voice of the giant, now only a weak copy of its former powers, spoke a single note of idiotic music. Popolok walked, and Popolok sang. Was there ever a sight in Europe the equal of it? They watched Mick and Judd as it took another step towards them. The old man had wet his pants. Blubbering and begging, he dragged himself away from the ruined cottage, into the surrounding trees, dragging his dead legs after him. The Englishmen remained where they stood, watching the spectacle as it approached. Neither dread nor horror touched them now, just an awe that rooted them to the spot. They knew that this was a sight they could never hope to see again. This was their apex. After this there was only common experience. Better to stay then, though every step brought death nearer. Better to stay and see the sight while it was still there to be seen. And if it killed them, this monster, then at least they would have glimpsed a miracle, known this terrible majesty for that brief moment. It seemed a fair exchange. Now, Popolok was within 2 steps of the cottage. They could see the complexities of its structure quite clearly. The faces of the citizens were becoming detailed, white, sweat-wet, and content in their wariness. Some hung dead from the harnesses, their legs swinging back and forth like the hanged. Others, children particularly, had ceased to obey their training and had relaxed their positions, so that the form of the body was degenerating, beginning to seethe with the boils of rebellious cells. Yet still it walked, each step an incalculable effort of coordination and strength. Boom! The step that trod the cottage came sooner than they thought. Mick saw the leg raised, saw the faces of the people in the shin and ankle and foot. They were as big as he was now, all huge men chosen to take the full weight of this great creation. Many of them were dead. The bottom of the foot, he could see, was a jigsaw of crushed and bloody bodies pressed to death under the weight of their fellow citizens. The foot descended with a roar. In a matter of seconds, the cottage was reduced to splinters and dust. Popelok blotted the sky utterly. It was, for a moment, the whole world, heaven and earth. Its presence filled the senses to overflowing. At this proximity, one look would not encompass it. The eye had to range back and forwards over its mass to take it all in, and even then the mind refused to accept the whole truth. A whirling fragment of stone flung off from the cottage as it collapsed, struck Judd full in the face. In his head, he heard the killing stroke like a ball hitting a wall, a play-yard death, no pain, no remorse. Out like a light, a tiny, insignificant light, his death cry lost in the pandemonium, his body hidden in the smoke and the darkness. Mick neither heard nor saw Judd die. He was too busy staring at the foot as it settled for a moment in the ruins of the cottage while the other leg mustered the will to move. Then Mick took his chance. Howling like a banshee, he ran toward the leg, longing to embrace the monster. He stumbled in the wreckage and stood again, bloodied, to reach the foot before it was lifted and he was left behind. There was a clamor of agonized breath as the message came to the foot that once again it must move. Mick saw the muscles of the shin bunch and marry as the leg began to lift. He made one last lunge at the limb as it began to leave the ground, snatching a harness or a rope or human hair, flesh itself, anything to catch this passing miracle and to be part of it. Better to go with it wherever it was going, serve its purpose, whatever that might be. Better to die with it than live without it. He caught the foot, found a safe purchase on its ankle. Screaming his sheer ecstasy at his success, he felt the great leg raise and glanced down through the swirling dust to the spot where he had stood, already receding as the limb climbed. The earth was gone from beneath him. He was a hitchhiker with a god. The mere life he had left nothing to him now, or ever. He would live with this thing. Yes, he would live with it, seeing it and eating it with his eyes until he died of sheer gluttony. He screamed and howled and swung from the ropes, drinking up his triumph. Below, far below, he glimpsed Judd's body curled up, pale on the dark ground, irretrievable. Love and life and sanity were gone. Gone like the memory of his name or his sex or his ambition. It all meant nothing. Nothing at all. Boom. Boom. Popelok walked, the noise of its steps receding to the east. Popelok walked, the hum of its voice lost in the night. After a day, birds came. Foxes came, flies, butterflies, and wasps came, and Judd moved. Judd shifted. Judd gave birth. In his belly, maggots warmed themselves. In a vixen's den, the good flesh of his thigh was fought over. After that, it was quick. The bones yellowing, the bones crumbling. Soon, an empty space which he had once filled with breath and opinions. Darkness, light, darkness, light. He interrupted neither with his name. So it looks like Stephen King isn't the only one who's bad with endings. Although, to be fair, how the hell do you end that? Stay scary, wildlings, and make the most of your nights.